Germany invades Poland. Hitler's rearmament campaign explodes on the muddy battlefields of Allied territories. German tanks tear through borders to clear the path for invading infantry. With their new coats of armor, the Axis nations redefine war as blitzkrieg. In 1939, the world witnessed the beginning of a new style of warfare known as blitzkrieg, or lightning war. The principal weapons were the tanks and tactical support aircraft, integrated with infantry and artillery. These elements worked together to deliver a swift and devastating punch. Germany perfected this fighting technique under the guidance of master armor tactician General Heinz Guderian. The aim of the blitzkrieg was to knock the enemy off balance and keep him reeling until victory was at hand. Overhead, waves of dive bombers acted as aerial lightning, while fighters strafed the ground troops. It was a style of warfare which brought virtually all of Europe under Axis control. When Adolf Hitler, a World War I corporal, came to power in 1933, his first priority was rearmament. He completely ignored the Treaty of Versailles, which restricted the size of the German army to 100,000 men and prevented German development of tanks, submarines, and combat aircraft. Instead, Hitler set out to create the strongest war machine in Europe. Industry was pumped up, and under the direction of Albert Speer, went into high gear, manufacturing guns and fighting vehicles to serve in the Army's new elite forces, the Panzer divisions. Renowned firms such as Henschel, Daimler-Benz, Krupp, and Rheinmetall all had production lines working around the clock. Dozens of other civilian manufacturers dropped their peacetime pursuits and turned their attention to arms manufacture. Thousands were employed on the assembly lines to feed the voracious Nazi war machine. Despite the enormous pre-war industrial and mechanized buildup, in 1940, most German artillery was still pulled by horses. There were just 10 of the new Panzer divisions, with a total of only 2,500 tanks. Over half the tanks were armed only with machine guns. The infantry still reached its objectives on foot, and the army was far from completely mechanized. Armored cars were used in reconnaissance battalions as advanced scout vehicles. The most common was the Type 231, a heavy 8-wheeled vehicle armed with a 20mm cannon. It had dual driver's positions and could move backwards and forwards with equal speed up to 50 miles per hour. Small Czech tanks were pressed into German service after the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1939. Known as the Panzer 35 and 38T, these were superior to German tanks at the time due to heavier armament and thicker armor. They served the German army well until they were outclassed by the Russian T-34 tanks. The small Panzer I tank played an important role in Germany's invasion of the West in 1940. Weighing only 5 or 6 tons, it had a crew of 2 and carried 2 machine guns. The armor was thin and could only give protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, but their lightning strike against France proved effective despite their small size, demoralizing the enemy forces. The Panzer II was introduced as a stopgap measure because of production problems with the later Panzer IIIs and IVs. It was a 3-man tank armed with a 20mm cannon and a machine gun. It weighed about 10 tons, could reach a speed of 25 miles per hour, and had a range of about 100 miles over open country. Hitler and his general staff followed the swift progress of the Panzer divisions through France from the special train which served as the Führer's mobile headquarters. Hitler feared that these Panzer divisions might be destroyed because the supporting infantry and artillery simply couldn't keep up with the tanks. He halted the advance of the tanks, allowing the British to escape at Dieppe. The German infantry and horse-drawn supply wagons plodded along the narrow roads of France, unable to match the swift pace of the tanks and mechanized vehicles. The tanks roared ahead to seize all the glory, carrying the lightning war into the West. One of the most important weapons in the German arsenal was the Krupp 88mm anti-aircraft gun. In addition to supporting the panzer divisions by clearing the skies of attacking enemy aircraft, it was also used as an anti-tank weapon. In this role, it became one of the most hated and feared weapons of the entire war. Equally important in the combined arms strategy of the blitzkrieg was the Junkers 88 Stuka dive bomber. It was specifically designed for close air support and could deliver bombs with devastating accuracy right in the front line of the advancing tanks and troops. The success of the German campaign in the West was not due as much to superior technology as to superior tactics, training, and leadership. Many of the French and British tanks and aircraft opposing them were actually better machines, but the Nazis swept on, pushing everything before them in a lightning advance. The early German successes were due in large part to the Panzer III tank. Designed by Daimler-Benz, the Panzer III was intended to take on other tanks in direct battle. Krupp's Panzer IV, on the other hand, was conceived as an infantry support vehicle. In order to meet and best other tanks, the Panzer III was armed with a 37mm gun, which was the standard German anti-tank gun of the time. This proved too small to be effective and was later replaced with a heavier 50mm gun for better velocity and armor penetration. The armor on the Panzer III was just over ½ an inch thick, but this was increased to nearly 3 inches over time for better protection. The tank carried a 5-man crew, weighed 20 tons, and was powered by a 200 to 300 horsepower gasoline engine. It could travel up to 25 miles an hour and had a range of roughly 100 miles. Panzer IIIs were also produced as command and artillery observation vehicles. After Hitler's victory in the West, attention shifted to North Africa. General Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps battled the British in the desert for 2 years, and the endurance of men and machines was pushed to the limit on both sides. Mines were used extensively by both the Germans and the British. These were usually laid by hand, but the German firm of Krupp came up with a mine plow to make the task easier. The plow, towed behind a tank, dug a shallow trench into which the mines were then laid. Although a good idea, the device was never adopted by the Army. The Krupp Panzer IV tank was the mainstay of panzer divisions during the entire war. It was originally designed as an infantry support vehicle to work with the Panzer III. It was a larger tank and carried the new longer-barreled 75mm guns, which could fire better armor-piercing rounds and made the Panzer IV a highly effective weapon. Along with Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs led the way during Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union. Using blitzkrieg tactics, the Germans swept down on the unprepared Russian forces. They overran positions and captured men and vehicles with hardly a shot fired, and entire Soviet armies were encircled within the first month of the campaign. The legend of the Panzer Corps continued to grow. The Panzer IV was a conventionally designed machine. It looked much like a Panzer III with slab sides, a rear-mounted gasoline engine, and a crew of 5. It could move quickly at speeds up to 25 miles per hour, although it was bigger and heavier than earlier Panzers. The Panzer IV also had a more powerful 300 horsepower engine and a longer range than the III, about 150 miles. The basic design of the tank allowed for bigger and heavier guns and armor to be added as the war progressed. This meant the Panzer IV could remain in service without being completely redesigned, and these versatile tanks fought on through the end of the war. At its thickest,